The packed courtroom buzzes with shock as 7-year-old Liam is led to the defense table, his tiny hands gripping his mother's sleeve. The judge, an older woman with piercing eyes, scans the room before turning her gaze to the prosecution, her voice firm but laced with disbelief. "A child on trial for revenge?" she asks, raising an eyebrow. The prosecutor, a sharp-suited man, steps forward, adjusting his glasses before speaking in a grave tone. "This is not a prank, Your Honor. This is a deliberate act of destruction, and the evidence will prove it." The room falls silent as the words hang in the air. Liam looks up at his mother, his eyes wide and frightened. She squeezes his hand, reassuring him, but her own face is pale with worry. She knows how serious this is, even if her son doesn't fully understand. Across the aisle, Miss Peterson, the neighbor who brought the charges, sits with his arms crossed, his face stern and unforgiving. He watches Liam like he is some sort of criminal, despite the fact that he is just a child. His car was damaged beyond repair, and he wants justice no matter what. The bailiff reads the charges. Liam is accused of pouring wet cement into Miss Peterson's car, exhaust, a move that led to the vehicle's engine being completely ruined. The repairs would cost thousands of dollars, and the car itself might never run again. Liam, a 7-year-old boy, sits there accused of causing this destruction. The audience murmurs in disbelief, some shaking their heads, while others glance at the small boy, wondering how he could have even done something like this. The prosecution wastes no time. They present their first piece of evidence, security footage taken from a nearby home. On the grainy black and white screen, a small figure can be seen moving near Peterson's driveway late at night. The figure approaches the car, bends down near the exhaust pipe, and stays there for several moments before scurrying away. The prosecution pauses the video at the exact moment the figure is next to the vehicle. They zoom in as much as they can, and though the quality is poor, they insist that this is clearly Liam. Gasps ripple through the courtroom as the judge leans forward, squinting at the screen. The prosecutor continues, stating that Miss Peterson had a long-standing issue with Liam playing too close to his property. Just a few days before the incident, Peterson had confronted the boy, telling him to stay away from his yard. They argue that Liam, in his childish anger, decided to get revenge by destroying the car. The story seems almost too dramatic, too unreal, and yet here they are in a courtroom treating a 7-year-old like a mastermind of destruction. Liam's mother cannot hold back any longer. She stands, her voice shaking. "My son would never do this. He is just a child." But the prosecutor immediately counters, turning to the judge with a cold expression. "He may be a child, ma'am, but that does not mean he is innocent. Some children are capable of more than we believe." The weight of his words settles over the room, and for the first time, true doubt flickers in the judge's eyes. The courtroom is heavy with tension as the prosecutor steps forward, his voice calm but firm. "Your Honor, this is not just a case of childish mischief. This was premeditated revenge, and we have more than just footage to prove it." The audience leans in, listening intently. Liam sits frozen in his chair, his small fingers gripping the hem of his mother's sleeve, his eyes darting around the room as if trying to make sense of what is happening to him. The judge turns her sharp gaze to the prosecutor, motioning for him to continue. "Very well, present your evidence," she says. The prosecutor nods and signals to an assistant who carries a clear plastic evidence bag to the front. Inside is a small spiral notebook decorated with stickers. It looks like an ordinary child's school book. But when the prosecutor opens it and flips to a certain page, the energy in the room shifts. Inside is a crude drawing done in pencil. It shows a car with an X drawn over it, and beside it in shaky letters are the words "Old Man's Car." The prosecutor holds the notebook up for the courtroom to see. "This was found in Liam's school bag, Your Honor." The defendant was clearly thinking about damaging Miss Peterson's car. The entire room murmurs, people exchanging whispers and concerned glances. Even the judge raises an eyebrow at this new piece of evidence. Liam's mother shakes her head furiously. "No, that is just a drawing. He loves drawing. He makes silly pictures all the time," she pleads, her voice rising. But the prosecutor quickly responds, "So it is just a coincidence that this child who made a drawing of a car being destroyed also happens to be caught on camera near the scene of the crime." The jury listens carefully, some looking at Liam with pity, others with curiosity. as if trying to decide if he really is capable of such a thing. Mr. Peterson takes the stand, next his expression tight with anger. He clears his throat and begins to speak. "I have had issues with that boy for months," he says, pointing a shaking finger at Liam. "He plays too close to my yard, he kicks his ball over my fence, and he never listens when I tell him to stay away. A few days before my car was destroyed, I caught him playing right by my driveway. I told him to leave, and do you know what he said to me? He narrows his eyes and lets the moment stretch for effect. He told me, 'You'll be sorry.'" Mr. Peterson continues, his voice growing louder. The audience gasps. The judge leans back slightly as if absorbing the weight of his words. Liam looks up at his mother, panic in his eyes. "But I never said that, Mama, I never did," he whispers. His mother strokes his hair, tears welling up in her eyes. The prosecutor turns to the jury with a satisfied look. "There you have it, ladies and gentlemen, a motive clear as day. A child scolded for misbehavior, a child who then threatens his neighbor, and days later, that neighbor's car is completely destroyed with cement. This is not just a wild accusation. This is a pattern of behavior. This is revenge, pure and simple." The courtroom is silent as the weight of his words settles in. The courtroom is tense as Liam's defense attorney, a calm and collected man in his late 40s, stands up, adjusting his tie before speaking. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, let us take a step back and think about what is really being suggested here." He begins, his voice smooth and steady. "We are being asked to believe that a 7-year-old boy not only plotted revenge, but also carried it out with precision and skill that would be difficult even for an adult." He walks slowly toward the jury, pausing for effect. "Let us consider the act itself," he continues. "Pouring cement into a car exhaust is not something a child could easily do. Cement is heavy and difficult to mix correctly, yet the prosecution wants you to believe that Liam, a child who struggles to tie his own shoelaces, managed to handle a bag of cement, mix it with water, and carefully pour it into a car exhaust, all without making a mess or being seen by anyone other than a grainy security camera image." He lets the words settle, watching as some jurors shift in their seats, doubt creeping into their expressions. Liam's mother wipes away a tear from her cheek. As her son tugs at her sleeve, she leans down and he whispers, "Mama, I don't even know how to use cement." His small voice trembles. She nods, hugging him tightly as the defense attorney continues his argument. "Your Honor, I would like to call an expert witness to the stand," he says. The judge nods, allowing it, and soon a forensic expert takes his place in the witness box. "Please state your name and occupation." The defense requests. The expert, a man with sharp glasses and a confident posture, introduces himself as a construction and forensic specialist with 20 years of experience in material analysis. The defense nods, satisfied, then asks, "In your professional opinion, could a 7-year-old realistically execute this kind of sabotage?" The expert adjusts his glasses before answering, "No, it is extremely unlikely," he says firmly. "Cement, especially the type used in this crime, requires proper mixing in the correct ratio. If mixed too thick, it would not pour. If mixed too thin, it would not harden correctly. A child of Liam's age would not have the strength or knowledge to prepare and pour it without assistance." A murmur spreads through the courtroom. The defense attorney steps closer. "So, in your view, the real perpetrator is someone older, someone stronger, and someone who understands how cement works?" The expert nods. "That is correct." Liam clings to his mother, his eyes wide with hope. The judge leans forward, tapping her fingers on the bench. "Interesting," she mutters under her breath before looking at the prosecution. "Does the state wish to cross-examine the witness?" The prosecutor shifts uncomfortably, then clears his throat. "We do not," he says reluctantly. The evidence is beginning to crumble in front of everyone's eyes. Liam watches as the tide of the trial slowly turns in his favor. For the first time since stepping into the courtroom, he begins to believe that maybe, just maybe, someone will finally listen to him. Mr. Peterson shifts in his seat, his jaw tight, his fingers tapping against the wooden bench as the defense attorney turns to face him with a calm but pointed expression. "Miss Peterson, you have made it clear that you believe Liam is responsible for what happened to your car. But I have to ask, do you have any proof beyond your personal feelings and assumptions?" The attorney's voice is steady, his eyes locked onto the older man's face. Miss Peterson scoffs, shaking his head as he leans forward. Proof, the proof is right there in front of you. He gestures wildly towards the security footage, the notebook, the threats he made to me. Everything adds up. What more do you need? He demands, his frustration evident. The defense attorney remains unfazed. Let's talk about this so-called threat. You say Liam told you you'll be sorry. When exactly did he say this? And what was the context? Mel Peterson folds his arms. A few days before my car was ruined, I caught him playing near my yard. Again, I want him to stay away. And he glared at me. Before saying it just like that, you'll be sorry, he spits out the words as if reliving the moment. The attorney nods slowly. And did anyone else hear him say this? Any witnesses besides yourself? Miss Peterson frowns, looking to the side. No, just me. The attorney pauses, letting the silence stretch before speaking again. So you are asking the court to believe that a 7-year-old child who has never been in trouble before suddenly developed a sophisticated plan for revenge based on a single vague statement made out of frustration? He turns to the jury, his voice firm. Leon shifts uncomfortably in his chair, gripping his mother's hand. She squeezes his fingers, trying to comfort him as whispers ripple through the courtroom. Will Peterson clenches his fists, clearly growing impatient. He leans forward, his voice rising. Do you think kids today are innocent? They get away with everything. They have no respect. I know what I saw, I know what I heard, and I know what he did. He snaps. The judge clears her throat sharply. Miss Peterson, control yourself, or I will hold you in contempt. She warns. Peterson presses his lips together, his face red with frustration. The defense attorney continues his questioning. You mentioned having problems with Liam in the past. Did you ever make any formal complaints to his mother, the school, or anyone else? Miss Peterson grits his teeth. I shouldn't have to complain. Parents should raise their kids right. The courtroom falls silent for a moment, the tension thick in the air. The defense attorney turns back to the jury, nodding slightly. Then let me ask one final question. Do you have any reason to believe that someone else might have wanted to target you or your car? Do you have any enemies or conflicts with anyone in the neighborhood? Miss Peterson shakes his head, scoffing. No. I mind my own business. People know better than to mess with me. The attorney catches on to the words immediately. People know better than to mess with you, meaning you have had conflicts before. Mr. Peterson's face hardens, but he says nothing. The courtroom stirs again as the first real crack in his certainty begins to show. The courtroom is silent as the defense attorney paces slowly, letting his last question hang in the air. The jury watches Miss Peterson closely, some leaning forward, waiting for his response. But the old man stays quiet, his jaw tight, his hands gripping the edges of the witness stand. The defense attorney stops, turns to face him, and asks again, Mr. Peterson, you said people know better than to mess with you. What exactly did you mean by that? Miss Peterson exhales sharply, shaking his head. I meant what I said. I don't cause trouble, but I don't take any either, he mutters. The defense attorney raises an eyebrow. So you have had conflicts in the past, haven't you? Miss Peterson's fingers tighten around the wood, his knuckles turning white. I don't see how that has anything to do with this case. The attorney tilts his head. Let me explain how it could be relevant. You claim that Liam, a 7-year-old child, is the only person who could have done this because of a smart argument you had with him. But you also admit you have had conflicts with others before. Could it be possible that someone else, someone older, someone actually capable of carrying out this act, might have been responsible? Miss Peterson shifts in his seat, looking uncomfortable. He opens his mouth to argue, but before he can speak, the defense attorney continues. In fact, we have a witness who might shed some light on this matter. The courtroom stirs as the defense attorney signals to the bailiff, who opens the side door. An elderly woman with a cane steps forward, slowly making her way to the witness stand. Her name is Mrs. Collins. She is a longtime resident of the neighborhood, and she has something important to say. Liam watches wide-eyed as the woman settles into the chair. The defense attorney approaches her with a kind smile. Miss Collins, thank you for being here today. Can you please tell the court what you saw on the night of the incident? Mrs. Collins nods, adjusting her glasses. Well, it was late, maybe a little after 10. I couldn't sleep, so I was sitting by my window drinking tea. I have a clear view of Peterson's driveway, and I saw someone moving around near his car. The prosecution straightens in their seat, listening carefully. The defense attorney nods encouragingly. And can you describe this person? Mrs. Collins adjusts her glasses again. Yes, they were taller than Liam. That's for sure. Definitely not a small child. They were wearing a hoodie and moving quickly like they didn't want to be seen. A ripple of murmurs spreads through the courtroom. The defense attorney glances at the jury, making sure they are taking this in. So, what you were saying, Miss Collins, is that the person near Miss Peterson's car that night did not match the description of Liam. Mrs. Collins shakes her head firmly. No, it was someone else. The prosecution quickly stands, objecting, Your Honor. This is just speculation. She didn't see a face. We can't confirm anything, but the judge holds up a hand. Overruled. This witness has the right to be heard. Continue. Miss Peterson looks furious, shaking his head. As he glares at Mrs. Collins, Liam clutches his mother's hand tighter as hope flickers in his eyes for the first time since this nightmare began. The courtroom is buzzing with whispers as Mrs. Collins sits firmly in the witness stand, her hands gripping the edges as if bracing for impact. The defense attorney steps closer, his voice steady. Mrs. Collins, you said the person you saw was not a child. Can you be absolutely certain of that? Mrs. Collins nods firmly. Oh yes, no doubt about it. I may be old, but my eyesight is still sharp. That person was too tall, too quick, and too careful to be a little boy like Liam. The prosecution stands up quickly, trying to regain control of the situation. Mrs. Collins, you admitted that the person was wearing a hoodie and that you could not see their face. Isn't it possible that in the darkness you simply mistook their height? Isn't it possible that it was still Liam? You saw her eyes narrow slightly. I may be old, son, but I know what I saw, and I tell you that boy had nothing to do with it. Miss Peterson lets out a harsh laugh, shaking his head. Unbelievable, this is ridiculous. An old lady looking out her window in the middle of the night is not proof that Liam didn't do it. He leans forward, his voice laced with anger. But the defense attorney is ready for this. He turns swiftly back to Miss Collins and asks, Did you see anything else? Mrs. Collins purses her lips, thinking, then nods yes. After the person finished at the car, they ran off toward the alleyway behind the houses. The defense attorney's eyes light up just as I suspected. He turns to the judge. Your Honor, I request that we review any available security footage from homes near that alleyway. If this person fled in that direction, there's a good chance they were caught on another camera. The judge nods her approval, granting the request. The prosecution looks uncomfortable, clearly realizing that their case is slipping through their fingers. Meanwhile, Liam's mother clasps her hands together, whispering a silent prayer. Her son sits quietly, his small fingers still curled around her arm, but now there is something new in his expression, something that wasn't there before. Hope. Miss Peterson, on the other hand, is growing visibly agitated, his face red, his fingers drumming on the armrest of his chair. The defense attorney watches him closely, then turns to the judge. Your Honor, before we move forward, I would like to ask Miss Peterson one simple question. The judge nods, allowing it. The attorney takes a slow breath before speaking. Miss Peterson, do you have any personal enemies, anyone who might want to get back at you for something you did? Miss Peterson scoffs, shaking his head. This again. I already told you I mind my own business, and people know better than to mess with me. His words come out sharp, defensive, and suddenly the room feels different. Something unspoken lingers in the air. The defense attorney tilts his head. People know better than to mess with you sounds like something someone might hold a grudge over. Mr. Peterson shifts uncomfortably, his eyes flicking toward the courtroom doors just for a second, but the defense attorney sees it, and so does the judge, and so does the jury. The case is unraveling, and everyone can feel it. The air in the courtroom is thick with tension as all eyes remain fixed on Miss Peterson. His fingers tighten around the edge of the witness stand, his face flushed with irritation. The defense attorney watches him closely, his expression calm, but his eyes sharp. You seem nervous, Miss Peterson. Is there something you're not telling us? Miss Peterson scoffs, shaking his head. Ridiculous. I have nothing to hide, he mutters, but his voice lacks the confidence it once held. The defense attorney steps closer, his tone steady. Earlier you said, people know better than to mess with you, and just now when I asked if you had any personal enemies, you avoided the question. I find that very interesting. He pauses, letting the silence stretch before speaking again. Because if someone wanted revenge on you, then that would mean there is another suspect, wouldn't it? Mr. Peterson shifts uncomfortably, his jaw tightening. The prosecutor stands objecting, Your Honor. This is pure speculation. The defense attorney turns to the judge with an easy nod, Your Honor. I believe this line of questioning is completely relevant. Mr. Peterson has made it clear that he believes Liam is the only possible culprit. But if there is reason to believe someone else had a motive, it could change everything. The judge considers this for a moment before nodding. Overruled. Continue. Miss Peterson lets out a frustrated sigh, crossing his arms. The defense attorney waits a beat before speaking again. Let's go back a few months. Did you have any disputes with anyone in the neighborhood? Miss Peterson exhales, sharply rolling his eyes. I have no idea what you're talking about. The defense attorney smiles, slightly turning toward the jury. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, let me share something interesting about Miss Peterson. He has lived in this neighborhood for years, and over the past year alone, he has filed multiple complaints against various neighbors, noise complaints, property disputes, even threats of legal action. One particular complaint stands out. He turns back to Miss Peterson, his voice sharp. Do you recall a man by the name of David Renner? Mr. Peterson's face darkens, his hands clenching into fists. Liam watches from his seat, his small fingers tightening around his mother's hand as the room holds its breath. Finally, Mr. Peterson speaks, his voice low and defensive. I know who he is, he mutters. The defense attorney nods. And isn't it true that David Renner is a former construction worker and that he had an ongoing dispute with you over a shared property line? Mr. Peterson's nostrils flare. But he says nothing. The defense attorney continues, pressing forward. And isn't it also true that you threatened to take him to court just a few weeks before your car was destroyed? Mr. Peterson's mouth opens and closes, his face pale now. He looks around as if searching for an escape, but there is none. The defense attorney steps even closer. One last question. Isn't it possible that David Renner, not Liam, had a reason to retaliate against you? With Peterson looks at the jury, at the judge, at the courtroom full of people. His lips press into a thin line, and for the first time since the trial began, he has nothing to say. The silence in the courtroom is deafening as all eyes remain locked on Miss Peterson. His face is tense, his jaw clenched, his hands gripping the edge of the stand as if holding on for dear life. The defense attorney steps back, slightly letting the weight of his last question settle before speaking again. You still haven't answered, Miss Peterson. Isn't it possible that David Renner had a reason to retaliate against you? Miss Peterson exhales, sharply shaking his head. This is nonsense, he mutters, shifting in his seat, his eyes flickering toward the exit. For just a second, the defense attorney notices, and so does the jury. He steps forward again, lowering his voice slightly. Miss Peterson, you said earlier that you had no conflicts with anyone, yet records show multiple complaints against your neighbors, and the most recent one was against Renner, a man with experience in construction and access to materials like cement. Doesn't that seem a little too coincidental? Miss Peterson swallows hard, but before he can respond, the judge turns toward the prosecutor. Does the prosecution have a rebuttal? The prosecutor stands, hesitates for a moment, then clears his throat. Your Honor, we maintain that Liam is the primary suspect. However, in light of these new details, we would like to request additional time to review the security footage from the alleyway and any possible connections to Renner. The defense attorney folds his arms, watching the prosecution struggle to maintain control of a case that is slipping through their fingers. The judge nods, granting the request. Bailiff, please retrieve any available footage and have it submitted into evidence, she says firmly. Liam watches quietly, his small fingers still curled around his mother's hand, hope flickering in his wide eyes. His mother squeezes his hand, whispering a silent prayer as the bailiff leaves the room to collect the footage. Minutes pass that feel like hours until finally the bailiff returns, holding a file in his hands. Your Honor, this footage was retrieved from a home security camera facing the alleyway. The judge nods, signaling for the footage to be played. The courtroom holds its breath as the screen flickers to life. The grainy black and white video shows a hooded figure darting through the alleyway, moving quickly and carefully away from Miss Peterson's car. The defense attorney watches intently, noting the height, the stride, the build. This is not a child, this is a fully grown adult. The prosecutor shifts uncomfortably, glancing toward Miss Peterson, while the jury leans in, watching every detail play out on the screen. Suddenly, the figure pauses, turning slightly toward the camera. For just a second, the hood slips back, revealing a face. Gasps ripple through the courtroom as the image freezes there. Staring back at them is David Renner himself, his sharp features clear. Even through the grainy footage, the judge leans forward, tapping her fingers on the bench in deep thought. Well, she murmurs before turning to the prosecutor. Do you still believe Liam is responsible for this? The prosecutor exhales, slowly lowering his head. The defense attorney glances toward Liam, offering him a small reassuring nod. The case is unraveling fast, and the truth is finally coming to light. The courtroom erupts in whispers as the image of David Renner remains frozen on the screen. Liam grips his mother's hand, his small body still tense, but now with something new: relief. His mother's eyes shine with unshed tears as she looks at her son, squeezing his fingers tightly, as if she cannot believe the nightmare might finally be ending. Mr. Peterson's face drains of color, his hands tremble slightly as he stares at the screen. The prosecutor shifts in his seat, clearly uncomfortable with how the case has turned. The judge clears her throat. The courtroom falls silent, her sharp eyes move between the defense, the prosecution, and Miss Peterson before she speaks. Well, it seems we now have more than reasonable doubt regarding Liam's involvement, she states, her voice calm but firm. The defense attorney takes a slow, measured step forward, looking directly at Miss Peterson. Peterson, do you still believe that Liam was responsible for the damage to your car, or is it time to admit that you may have been mistaken? Mr. Peterson's jaw clenches, his eyes darting around the room, searching for a way out. But there is none. His voice is quiet. When he finally speaks, I don't know, he mutters, shaking his head. I thought it was him. He was always causing trouble, always playing near my yard. The defense attorney's expression does not change. You assumed you didn't see him do it. You didn't have proof. You just assumed he did it because he was a child. Miss Peterson says nothing, his shoulders sagging slightly, the weight of the situation settling in. The judge leans forward, her voice cutting through the heavy silence. Miss Peterson, do you understand the seriousness of what you have done? You accused an innocent 7-year-old of a crime that could have changed his life forever. Liam's mother lets out a shaky breath, holding her son close to her as Miss Peterson shifts in his seat, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I was angry. I wanted someone to pay. The judge sighs, shaking her head as she turns toward the prosecution. In light of this new evidence, does the state wish to proceed with the charges against Liam? The prosecutor stands, clearing his throat. No, Your Honor. The state moves to dismiss all charges against Liam. There is clear, reasonable doubt, and with this new evidence, it is clear that another individual was responsible for the damage to Miss Peterson's car. A wave of emotion washes over Liam's mother as she pulls her son into her arms, tears slipping down her face. Liam buries his face in her shoulder, his small body trembling as he realizes he is finally free. The judge nods. The charges against Liam are hereby dropped. She turns to the bailiff, issue a warrant for the arrest of David Renner for property damage and any other relevant charges. The bailiff nods before stepping out to carry out the order. As the courtroom begins to clear, Miss Peterson remains in his seat, staring at the floor, his expression unreadable. Liam looks up at his mother, who smiles down at him, her voice gentle. Let's go home, baby, it's over now. And with that, Liam and his mother step out of the courtroom, leaving behind the weight of false accusations and stepping into the light of freedom.